We are here to talk about relativism. This is a theory in ethics broadly construed, but it's an answer to a very different kind of question than we've been considering so far. So far, we've been thinking about questions like, what is it right to do? What is it wrong to do? In the case of Aristotle, what virtues should we have? How do we acquire those virtues? Sorts of things like that. But it's sort of a different kind of question to ask, well, wait a second. When I ought to do something, say I ought to, say, maximize happiness. Let's take the utilitarian answer to the question of what we ought to do. So we ought to maximize net happiness. Well, we could ask this other question in one sense, a deeper, a more, you could call it a meta question, even if you want to get fancy. What makes it true that we ought to maximize utility? And in particular, we can think about one of two broad classes of answer to this question. You could think, well, you ought to maximize utility. If you're a utilitarian, you think this. You ought to maximize utility, and you ought to maximize utility regardless of what anyone thinks or says. Even cultures who think it's all about maximizing pain over pleasure, unhappiness over happiness, even for them, they should maximize happiness. They just don't know it. They're just wrong. Those cultures and those people who think that, they're just wrong. On the other hand, you might hear that answer, the answer that says it's an objective fact that you ought to maximize utility. And you might hear that and be on the other side and think that sounds crazy. It's crazy to think that there are these objective moral facts that obtain independently of what anyone thinks or feels. In fact, if it is the case that you ought to maximize utility, that's only because you believe it, or you think that it's true, or you want it to be true, or whatever. It's somehow made true in virtue of an individual's, or maybe even a culture's, moral beliefs or commitments or desires, even attitudes in general. Something going on in their head that they're doing is making that true. There's no objective moral facts. So conceive of it like this. We have objective domains. Let's try to get away from ethics and morality in general. We have clearly objective domains, and we have clearly what you might call relative domains. So to take one of the former, consider the realm of science. Consider the realm of physics, the most, in many people's view, the most fundamental of the sciences. There's no sense in which the truths of physics depend on what we think, right? If, gosh, I wish I knew some physics at this point, but let's get away from physics, just look at broad scientific examples. If the law of gravity obtains, it obtains regardless of what we think. It's not like the law of gravity only is true because we think that it's true or we want it to be true. That would be an absurd view. Similarly, what happened? Before people thought that the Earth was round, when they thought the Earth was flat, was it still round, or was it flat because they thought it was flat? Now, I mean, look. You could kind of dance around this a little bit, but in the end, the Earth was round, always. It doesn't matter. Before they figured out it was round, they were just wrong, right? So in this sense, on most scientific truths like this, there's an objective matter of fact. Now, we might be wrong about it, but we need to separate the two claims. We're right about all of the scientific questions, and separate that from the claim that there is an objective matter of fact with regard to these questions. We might not have the answer, but the answer is one way, and it doesn't depend on what we think. In fact, that's the only real way we could be mistaken about scientific matters of fact, is if the truth is objective and it's something out there for us to discover, not to invent. Okay, so science is kind of a stereotypical or prototypical example of an objective domain. The answers don't depend on what's going on in our head, what we think or believe or whatever. Now, go to the other side. Let's try to come up with an example of something that where the truth is relative. Here's my best shot. Food, the tastiness of food. So I think, for example, Texas style barbecue is better than other forms of barbecue. Especially, it's better than like Carolina style barbecue, where the sauce is super vinegary. They don't, brisket or beef in general is not as big of a tradition there. I mean, there's some melding that's been happening in recent years just because of sort of globalism and the mixing of cultures. But traditionally, they've not had beef as part of their barbecue, and that those two facts, the sauce fact and the beef lackingness, in my mind, make Carolina style barbecue an inferior kind of barbecue to Texas barbecue. Now, I could make a joke here and say, and that's just true regardless of what you think. Even I don't care who you are. If you disagree with that, you're wrong. And that'd be a funny joke. But the reason it would be a funny joke is because we all know that's kind of not true, right? For someone who just has a taste for vinegar and, you know, beef upsets their stomach or something, they prefer pork, then Carolina style barbecue is just going to be tastier to them. And so what's tasty, what's good food, good tasting food, that is just going to be kind of relative to what you like or what you think, or something like that. Now, so science, clear case of an objective domain. Tastiness of food, pretty clear case of a relative domain where the truth is relative to our opinions or our beliefs or something like this. And the question we're going to consider in this video and in the next is, where does morality fall? Where do the truths of ethics and morality fall? If you think that it's wrong to do something, is it like a scientific claim where we can be wrong about it? We can learn, we can discover. Maybe whole cultures can be wrong, can be incorrect in their moral beliefs. Or is it like barbecue? Is it just kind of like the truth kind of depends on what you think or what you like, right? Yeah, the principle of utility is true. Yeah, generosity is good, but that's just because I really like generosity, or that's just because my culture really likes generosity. Okay, so that's the question we're considering. The question is ethics more like barbecue or more like science? Okay, so let me share my screen with you. Here's kind of a general summary of the new kinds of questions that we're asking. Now, here's some really vague claims that you hear people make, or making claims in this vicinity. So you might think, what's right for you depends on your values. We should tolerate all moral viewpoints. Science is objective, ethics is subjective. What's right and wrong is in the eye of the beholder. When it comes to morality, it's all relative. Now, with the exception of maybe the second one, there are ways of, that's a claim that could be compatible, depending on how you understand this claim, could be compatible with objectivism about ethics. But if you find all of these super plausible, or most of them super plausible, you're probably leaning in the direction of relativism about ethical truths. So let's get one distinction on the table real quick. In this video, we're going to try to get clear what relativism is, give some analogies for it, and just get a solid understanding of it. And in the next video, we're going to talk about problems for the view.
Yeah, well, you know, that's just like your opinion, man.
So if you saw that, and if you recognize it, that's a clip from The Big Lebowski. Relativists, let's take the claim that abortion is wrong. Relativists about morality are going to say that, well, when that is true, or when any moral claim is true, its truth is determined by a culture's or an individual's commitments. Commitments is just my big broad term here. You can have different forms of relativism. So some will think, no, it's determined by the cultures, or others will think it's determined by the individual's commitments. And even among those camps, you can get more specific about what the truth really depends on. It might be beliefs, it might be desires, it might be evaluations or something like that. And there's lots of disagreement there. But they're all grouped together under the camp of relativism because they all think that it's something in an individual's head or in a group of individuals' head that's contingent. They could think different things, and it's making the moral claim true. If they thought something else, a different thing would be true. So abortion is only wrong for me on relativism if I, or possibly my culture, we'll make that distinction later, thinks it's wrong. Okay, now we need to compare this to a different view, a view that we can call nihilism. Let's see if my next clip will work.
Willie doesn't care about anything. He's a nihilist.
Oh, that must be exhausting.
So nihilists are different from relativists. And here's the big difference. Relativists still think that certain ethical claims are true. They still are going to say, yeah, abortion is wrong in certain cultures and for certain people. But they're still going to think certain things are wrong, certain things are right. You have obligations. There are virtues. But nihilists are sort of a more hardcore camp. They think that such claims are just never true. There are just no moral facts. Everything is permitted. If you've ever made any forays into Russian literature, especially Dostoevsky, you will have encountered nihilism. And if you've ever watched The Big Lebowski, you will have too. I have a pet theory about The Big Lebowski that it's actually based on one of Dostoevsky's novels called The Idiot. At any rate, the nihilists in The Big Lebowski, if you haven't seen that movie, you got to go see that movie. Come on, it's a classic. It's a cult classic. The nihilists in The Big Lebowski say over and over, we believe in nothing, Lebowski. Nothing, Lebowski. Okay? They don't believe in anything. That clip that I showed you is one of them lounging in a pool, presumably because he thinks there's no meaning in life, right? So any claims about meaning or morality or what we ought to do or how we ought to be living, they don't believe any of them. They think there are no such truths. There are just no moral facts. So abortion is not wrong, but that's just because nothing is wrong. Abortion is also not really morally permissible because nothing, that gets to be a complicated issue. But, abortion isn't wrong. Restriction of access to it is not wrong. Basically, for any given moral claim out there, you ought to give to charity, that's false. You should take care of your kids, that's false. There are just no moral facts. Okay, so we should talk about two kinds of I don't know why I named this two kinds of relativism. What I'm really doing here is giving an analogy. If it's not clicking for you in the realm of morality, there are relativists and nihilists about other sorts of domains. So you can imagine this in the realm of aesthetics, that is, or without the fancy terminology, art or art theory, or the theory of the beautiful, what makes something beautiful. And you can imagine someone saying, I believe that certain things are beautiful. I just think it's determined by what we think is beautiful, by what we find, what seems beautiful to us, right? There's no objective standard of beauty. If we had been born, we might think that, whatever, Van Gogh, who this painting on the right is by Van Gogh, we might, have such a constitution that we think this is beautiful, but what if we had evolved differently so that the cones and rods in our eyes worked differently and this looked really ugly to us? Well, this would not be beautiful then. There's no objective standard of beauty. It depends on what we think is beautiful. But notice that relativist still thinks that there are things that are beautiful. They're just not objectively beautiful. But you can imagine a different sort of person who says, nothing is beautiful. You may think it's beautiful and you're wrong, right? There are no facts. There's no such thing as beauty. Okay, so hopefully that helps you kind of place this distinction. All right, now let's talk about two kinds of relativism. And then we'll end the video. What's common, I said, to both kinds of relativism is that it's people's attitudes that are making moral claims true. The difference, the distinction, or the disagreement amongst relativists, or one big disagreement amongst relativists, is whether it's the individual's attitudes or the attitudes of a whole culture. Now, if you go into certain academic departments like sociology departments, something like cultural relativism is almost an axiom in those fields. They just assume that there are no moral facts that are objective of culture's attitudes, and kind of the culture's commitments determine what makes something right or wrong or good or bad or any of these other moral properties. So there's this disagreement about whether it's the culture as a whole, whether it's the individual's attitudes, and it makes a huge difference, because if it's the culture's attitudes that make something right or wrong, we as individuals can actually be mistaken about what's right and wrong. Like, I might think that abortion is wrong, but if 80% of Americans think that it's okay, then I'm just wrong. I'm mistaken. Abortion is actually okay. And that's true even if there are no objective moral facts, because it just depends on the broader culture. And that's just to say, I might be mistaken. Since I can be mistaken about what my culture thinks, and since my opinions diverge from those of my culture often, I can have incorrect moral opinions on this view. But notice individual relativists, they have a harder time saying that individuals can have incorrect moral opinions. If your opinions just determine what the moral facts are or what the moral truths are, then it's going to be really hard to be mistaken. So lots turns on, or a lot of things turn on this distinction between cultural and individual relativism. And I'm going to stop there for now. So I'm going to stop the share. And in the next video, we'll talk about a couple of problems for relativism.